Okay, everyone, so I'm going to start now, and if anyone can join, I'll just let them in. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this event. We are celebrating Poder's 30th anniversary today, and we're going to be focusing specifically on 30 years of resistance and dignity, and then we're going to talk about Tank Farm, and we're here today with 3 of the founding members of Poder to discuss Tank Farm and the origins. So first, I'm going to start off reading Poder's mission statement. So Poder is an acronym for People Organized in Defense of Earth and Her Resources, and it's a woman-led people of color grassroots social justice organization formed in 1991 to increase the participation of residents in East Austin in decisions related to the economic development and environmental protection of our community. Our mission is to redefine environmental issues as social and economic justice issues and collectively set our own agenda to address these concerns as basic human rights. We seek to empower our communities through education, advocacy, and action. Additionally, Poder would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the indigenous land of Turtle Island, which is the ancestral name for what is now called North America. And we would like to specifically acknowledge the Alabama, Cocheta, Caddo, Carrizo, Huahuiltecan, Comanche, Kickapoo, Lipan Apache, Tonkawa tribes, and all indigenous people and communities who have been a part of these lands. And we also actively fight for decolonization and land back. So we're going to start off with this event by looking at a video that explains Tank Farm. So I'm going to play that right now.
The public and will be up for about a month.
I'm going to add 2 more people in.
Urged to write names and messages on the hearts.
Okay, sorry, 2 more people joined for those of us.
And I got them.
We're going to be watching a video on Tank Farm.
Starting back in January 1992, residents of East Austin neighborhoods discovered that Mobil Oil Company was seeking to expand its facilities. The Mobil Oil facility is in a residential area, and there are at least 6 schools located within a 1-mile radius of Mobil Oil. Concerned residents started asking questions, and by February, stories were being reported almost every day in the newspapers and on TV.
Remember your
Headlines on Tuesday, February 11th read, "Gas storage sites fuel debate. East Austin groups fear nearby tanks causing illnesses." 2 days later, on Thursday, air tests were taken in the tank area by scientists who work for the State of Texas Air Control Board. On Friday, the 14th, the results of water and soil tests were announced. The front page headline read, "East Austin soil, water, contaminated. Fuel site tests show high level of carcinogen." Residents in the area are meeting and speaking out among themselves and in public about their experiences of living by what is now known as the Tank Farm.
I've been getting real bad headaches for about 2 years now. My hair's falling out. Everything in my house shakes from the vibration from the tanks. And the trees are dying back there. They're almost all dead back there. I live right in back of it. When it rains or whatever, all that, stuff just comes down from those berms that are right in back of the house. So that's what I have to say is just terrible back there.
Been without using my hand it's about 3 or 4 months. One bunch will break out and they'll bust and dry, and then another bunch will bust out.
My child has been sick, and they said it was a conditioning of his blood cells or blood count was down, but it's just because kind of strange that another child also has it, and maybe down the road there's another one and they're diagnosing it at the same thing. I want to see if maybe there is. I'm saying there is, and it's not no maybe too. There is something there with that gas tank that are affecting these children, and rashes. All this rashes, they're coming on. A lot of where they can't breathe, nosebleeds, no apparent reason. I mean, all of a sudden there they are with nosebleeds. So let's go that way. They have headaches. These ladies, I've gone and seen them picking up these questionnaires. A lot of them have headaches. They don't know where they're coming from.
In this neighborhood for 28 years, going on 29 years now. I've raised all my kids down here. I raised 11 kids, and I have 28 grandchildren. So you understand the way I feel. I feel mad. I am upset. I have lived a contented life till January of this year when I found out. In all these years, we've been asleep. You might say that we've been asleep. We didn't know what was going on. We used to have headaches and this and that, nosebleeds, itchy, watery eyes. And we used to take aspirin and, sometimes go to the doctor. I have a son that he's got a problem with like allergic, he's got his nose, he can't stand it, and he's always, sick. I have taken him to the doctor. They think he's allergic to this and that. And he goes out to camp. He's a Boy Scout. He goes out to camp and he said he feels great up there. But as soon as he comes back into the neighborhood, he's the same problem all over again. I have bought some property here. If I had known then what I know now, I would have never bought any property out here. When I first moved out here, that went, I think we're only 3 tanks out here, and now it's all of a sudden they're just moving. They're moving into the people's backyard. They're killing us. That's what they're doing. They're killing us with their emissions, their gasoline and whatever they benzene and all this. They're killing us. Whose problem is it? It's certainly not ours. We didn't, we're not invading them. They're invading us, the gas tanks. If there's no contamination, why did they devalue our homes around here? Me, I'm already halfway there, but I don't care. But I'm concerned is about my grandchildren here, the little kids that will come. That's our future right there.
So for those of us who just joined, we just finished watching a video on Tank Farm, and then right now we're gonna start the panel discussion. And I also encourage everyone to put in your questions in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the conversation. So we are here today with 3 environmental justice leaders and also founding members of Poder. So first, if you all could just go around and maybe introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, that would be great.
Ladies first.
Good afternoon. I'm Susana Almanza, the director
and community organizer for Poder. I am a native of East Austin, and I'm here celebrating 30 years of Poder and the Poderistas.
I am Sylvia Herrera, and I'm a native East Austinite and also a founding member of Poder. And also I've been the volunteer health coordinator for Poder.
My name is Gilbert Rivera, also a native of East Austin, and also a founding member of Poder, plus several other organizations. One of them is Camila, Chicanos Against Military Intervention in Latin America, and also the founder of the Brown Berets here in Austin. And I've been here in Austin all of my 73 years.
Great. And just to introduce myself, my name is Alexia, and I have had the honor of working for Poder starting in 2019, and I'm just going to be facilitating this event. And so to kind of start off, I want to ask you guys, can you tell me a little bit more about your childhood and whether you were aware of some of the environmental issues going on in East Austin?
Well, I can probably start because I think out of the three, there's quite a few other people that lived right next to the tank farm. But my family and my extended family all lived on Alf, Munson, and Proc Lane, Alf Street being right across the fence from the tank farm. I had my grandmother, my aunt, my uncles, at least three other cousins that all had their houses along the Padilla family. I saw my picture of my aunt Lupe Padilla there earlier. And my family, my parents and us, we lived on Proc Lane. My sister lived on Munson, and other relatives, my brother Pete, Raymond lived on Springdale, right next to Munson. So all of our family, we lived around there, and we were greatly affected by the tank farm. My aunt and us, we would at times find about 1/8 of an inch or more of fine, what would be called lead paint or paint when they used to power clean the tanks, and all of the lead and all of the paint from there would fly into the air, and it would land on people's cars, on houses, and on their yards. And none of that was ever remediated or cleaned up. It would just get absorbed into the dirt. And as was mentioned before, you couldn't plant anything. Trees would die. Kids would play in the yards. And back in the day, kids played outside in the yards, not like today. And so it was real difficult. And one of the things that through Poder that happened was, and Susana probably can speak on it better than I can, they did a health survey all along there. And one of the things that they found was one of the people that was most ill, it was my mother. And she was sent to Houston to, I forget the name of the hospital there, a cancer hospital in Houston. And when she was tested, they asked her if she had ever worked in the coal mines. The coal miners are known to get black lung from absorbing all the coal and in their lungs, and so it turns black. Their lungs turn black. So her lungs, because of having lived there, we moved there in the mid-40s, all those years, almost 50 years at that time that the study was done, her lungs were, according to the doctors, very similar to miners that had worked in the coal mines. And ultimately, nobody would take up our cause to do some legal remediation because all the lawyers in the state of Texas were afraid of the multinational corporations, Texaco, Exxon, etc. And ultimately, my mom died of the effects of the tank farm, but there was nothing we could do because we had no lawyer that had the guts to take on the multinational corporations. Plus, not only our family, but everybody else there was, as you saw, 600 households. They had their value reduced to the point that the homes and the land were worthless. So that's how my family was directly affected by the tank farm.
Yeah. Sylvia, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear you. Yes, I grew up on Oak Springs, which is not too far away from the tank farm. And like Gilbert mentioned, when we were growing up, everybody was playing. There's a lot of children in the area when we realized what was going on. But and then at the time I was living on Springdale and an airport, well, blocks away, with my two small children. And what I have here is just an introduction to this, and I don't know if you can see it, but it says "Save the Children." And there were so many children and vulnerable elderly in the neighborhood, and that's what we were concerned about. And there were several schools in the area within the 1 mile radius, but sometimes as children, as families, we were there living to this hazardous facility, and a lot of times we didn't realize what was really going on until later on, as we became adults and began to realize what was going on in the tank farm.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, like growing up, definitely saw the distinction because we lived in a high poverty area right behind Guadalupe Church. And so, the streets were not paved. The street had rocks. You had to walk on rocks. And of course, back then we would run on rocks. It really didn't really bother us. But there was no gutter. So when it rained, that water was there. But I think the other thing I wanted to bring up is that in growing up, where the tank farm is now and where the new Trailhead apartments are and where Citgo oil company was at, was all of that was a pecan grove. And in front of that pecan grove on Ballman Airport was a pecan business, and they would purchase pecans. And my dad and I always went to pick the pecans because there was a big pecan orchard where the tank farms mowed it all down. There's still some pecan trees there left, but it was all a pecan orchard. And so you'll see throughout East Austin that pecan trees were very dominant in the area. And that was one way for communities to earn extra cash, was to pick the pecans and then sell them right there where the tank farm. That store got demolished, that little market got demolished, and that's where Citgo then put up its plant there. So growing up, very much I saw the injustice and the inequities, because also where we lived right, if you physically cross the street, it was the beginning or the end of the African American community. And so we grew up at a time where we saw a lot of discrimination. One, because we lived in poverty. The other one is because my parents were Spanish dominant speakers. And so you saw how people were treated and because of the color of your skin. And then when you go to the West Side, because my dad worked for a lumber company, and sometimes he had to deliver that, and we would see the big difference in the environment, the housing, the streets, everything you could see the difference, even going to the theater where Blacks had to sit at top and whites and Latinos were at the bottoms. I got to see the inequity by going up there with my African American friends, how the popcorn machine wasn't functioning yet. They sold popcorn, it wasn't fresh. The pickles weren't fresh. They didn't bother to clean it like downstairs. So at a very early age, I saw a lot of the inequities and the discrimination that took place. And part of that discrimination was on the environment and how the environment was treated. Later on, we got to see how Boggy Creek had got cemented, because we used to explore all the creeks growing up. But we got to see how Boggy Creek, from where the tanks are, for about 2 miles was cemented. And so a lot of the kids thought that's what a creek is supposed to be. And I feel like a big injustice because I got to feel the sand beneath my feet and then look at the tadpoles and all the ecosystem, whereas the children in that area were like in a canal, a cement canal, but it was called Boggy Creek. So I think that very early on, a lot of us got to see a lot of the injustice in the environment and stuff. We just didn't call it at that particular time, the environmental justice. And like Sylvia and Gilbert said, our focus was more like on police brutality because there was so much oppression, right? And our rights to our identity was another big issue. Housing, education, all those. But the tank farm came as one of the big struggles that Baudette took on.
Thank you
Alexis,
for sharing.
can I add something?
Yes, of course.
On the education, I think that's important because the discrimination in the schools were extremely harsh. And I think that's why a lot of us felt that we have to provide information to our community and inform them, because we had always been neglected in terms of information coming to our community about different things. But experiencing all that discrimination, and not only in the general community, but in the schools themselves, is something that I think impacted all of us growing up. And for instance, I started first grade there in Go Valley Elementary School, that's in the neighborhood of the tank farm. And my first language is Spanish. And so when I spoke Spanish in the first grade, they taped my mouth. And that has, sort of given me that energy to keep speaking out against injustices like that. But that was, I think that really impacted a lot of us, if not all of us.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too, and I think all three of us grew up in segregated Austin Independent School District, and I went to Go Valley, Allen Junior High, and Johnston High School, and the same thing as Sylvia is saying, in Go Valley School, I was kept on first. I went from first to high first. Has anybody ever heard of that? But because in first grade, I spoke Spanish and I was also punished. And at some point, I guess that was the beginnings of my protests, because I just stopped speaking because I knew if I spoke, I would get punished. And one of the things that they would do, and I'm pretty sure they did it in all the schools, and we all remember when we were kids, they'd line you up to go to the cafeteria or line you up to go to the library or out for recess. They'd put kids up and down the hall, and if anybody heard you speak in Spanish, they would report you to the teacher, and you wound up in the principal's office, either getting spanked with a paddle or getting your mouth taped or worse. And numerous times I went to school with pretty much blood blisters on my butt. And my mom would cry, my dad would get very upset, but they didn't know what else to do because that was the way it was. And so the discrimination and the things, the way we were brought up, I think built in us a resistance that our people have always had and brought it out. And I think that that resistance and that treatment in part created who we are today. And one of the things that I was explaining the situation was not speaking English to one of my coworkers one time and told him all the punishments and things like that were happening. And she said, but Gilbert, think about it. Wasn't it worth it? You speak such good English now. And it was like, what the hell? And so Austin is well known for its discrimination and its continued racism up to today. It was not till 1972 that the Austin Independent School District was taken from government, federal control, because since 1954 with Topeka versus Brown versus the Topeka School Board, that discrimination was outlawed in the country. The city of Austin, the Austin Independent School District, did not fully integrate till 1972. So Austin has a long history of resisting equity and equality.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, definitely oppression is connected in all different areas. And going back to Tank Farm, my next question for you guys is, after, you guys all experienced that environmental racism, and so did all your neighbors, but how did you actually come together and organize and research about the health issue for this to become a case, and for all the residents to understand that the reason all these things were happening was because of Tank Farm?
Well, we started out creating a one-page health survey, and we wanted to make it as simple as possible. We wanted to just make a checkoff list rather than, for us to be writing things, because we were going to go door to door. We had volunteers. We didn't have any paid staff. We were just all from the neighborhood, and so we created that one-page survey in English and Spanish to get an idea of what was going on in the community. And also we collected that information. We also provided the community, the information on the chemicals that were coming out of a tank farm. That was real important, because people didn't realize that they knew they were smelling gas, but they didn't necessarily know that, the connection between their migraines or the asthma and different respiratory problems that the children were having. And a lot of times people think, well, it's just happening to me. And sometimes you don't share that information with your neighbors or people further down in the neighborhood. So when we started collecting the information, it was just not one family, but it was most of the families in the tank farm, if not all of them. And so that's when people started really paying attention to how they were being impacted by the tank farm.
Yeah, and I want to add that Sylvia at the time was working on her PhD. And matter of fact, Sylvia was the first Chicana to get her PhD in East Austin. So, I really honor and want to recognize Sylvia for all her work. But before I go to the next step, I do want to, at this time, recognize all those people who participated in the Citizens Tank Farm Monitoring Committee, and that were their leaders, who have now passed on to the spirit world. Because Ron Davis was the chair of the East Austin Strategy Team. He was a former county commissioner, but we joined forces with East, which was all African-American neighborhood associations. Also, Johnny Limon from the Gardens Neighborhood Association, Chris Faniel, which was a co-chair along with Sylvia of the Tank Farm Citizens Monitoring Committee, and also Anita Padilla, who you heard talking about all her children from the ALF Neighborhood Association, and Mr. Paul Sacedo, and also all of those who were victims of the tank farms who have now passed on. I don't want to forget all the struggle that they, did, and who are now no longer with us, but I do want to recognize them. And also, what happened was in December, that closes down during Christmas break, but I got the call from Dr. Sylvia Herrera, saying, hey, mobile is looking to expand. It's in the classifieds in the Austin American Statesman. And for one thing, I thought, what is Sylvia doing with reading the classifieds during Christmas break? But then she said, well, Susana, we have to go do research. And I went, well, we're on Christmas break. And she says, no. So there we were going down to the Texas Air Control Board, looking at the permits, the permit that Mobil Oil was one of the transnational corporations that wanted to expand and spew out more xylene, toluene, and benzene, a known carcinogen. We found a letter there from the health department that said they were very concerned with the permit because it was right adjacent to people's homes, and that benzene was a known carcinogen. And so they were very concerned about more emissions coming into the area. And so that was really our leverage too, and finding all the different chemicals, and then Sylvia doing the research as to what are the side effects of being exposed to these chemicals. And we were real surprised when we did the first meeting. We didn't expect it, but it was a very full audience. And you saw a little clip of it there in the video of how full that room was of residents. And so, so just giving out that flyer, then talking about the exposure, and then from there was creating phone trees, phone captains, so that when we had meetings, and I can tell you, we were having meetings almost every week with the tank farm, and also helping the neighborhoods who didn't have neighborhood associations, helping them form neighborhood associations so that they would be representatives. And I think that it was what lifted it even more was for their members going to the Texas Commission, and also with Glenn Maxey, state representative, helping us to get the Tank Farm Citizens Monitoring Committee sanctioned by the state. And I think one of the other big important things was the toxic tour. That was held on February the 10th, 1992. And we got Councilman Gus Garcia to help us get 2 Capitol Metro bus. And we loaded those Capitol Metro bus with state representatives, county, city, PTA leaders, principals, and some of the community leaders. And that's where you'll see in that video, we stopped at what Gilbert said at his aunt's house to hear her testimony. And then we take the bus, and everybody has to be walking, and they can, at that time, they can smell the gasoline. It's just like I tell people, you know, when you load, you fill your gas tank with gasoline, and then you get a whiff and you kind of turn, how it smells. That's the way it smelled in that community, 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. I really don't know how the people survive with that odor and that impact on it. And I think that, you know, that was massive organizing that took place during the tank farm. I know if you want to add something to that, Gilberto, because you were there during that toxic tour, and so was Sylvia.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah, thank you. I think that was really what turned things around. One of the things that was happening simultaneously with this was that we were getting a lot of pushback from some elected officials. So we had a lot of support from elected officials that lived east of Interstate 35, including Commissioner Marcos de Leon at the time, and as you said, County Commissioner for Precinct 1, Ron Davis. But I remember one of the council members, and he was, y'all can figure this one out, he was the only Hispanic council member at City Hall at the time. He asked me, what did we think we were doing, that we were basically a group of people that had no power, and that we were thinking, what were we thinking of when we were looking at taking on 6 multinational corporations with billions of dollars in their pockets. And ultimately, I think all of those people came around because the people, the community began to mobilize, organize, and be loud. And one of the things that was made it even more successful was the collaboration between people of color, as you all know, those of you that are activists and organizers, one of the ways that we are kept down is by dividing us, by the establishment dividing us, and were able to put the organization together. Not only were we able to put the Black community and the brown community together, we brought in the white environmentalists who up to this time had really not paid much attention to East Austin. They were more concerned about the Edwards Aquifer and how Barton Springs and that was being polluted. And so one of the things that the city council did is put together an ordinance, I think it's an ordinance, about Save Our Springs, which protected the Edwards Aquifer and basically West Austin, west of Interstate 35, protected it from overbuilding and building, and made East Austin the preferred growth area. So we began to get, during that time, even more toxic companies and moving into East Austin. And we already had the school buses from the AISD. We had the tank farm. We had other chemical plants around Zavala School. We had the power plant. So when the white environmentalists came to support us, I think very few of them had ever heard the term environmental racism and environmental justice. And I think Susana, as a matter of fact, maybe I'm wrong, but she got an international award where I think she went to Brazil to accept the award for the struggle around the tank farm. And so we became an internationally known movement. But the people, the poor people of East Austin that lived in that neighborhood, which was Black and brown community, were the real heroes. They were the ones, we were the ones that lived there 24/7, as Susana says, year round. And many of us having children with asthma, skin problems, rash, and so on, couldn't grow anything in your yard. The trees were dying. You'd have to keep your windows closed because of all the smells, and many of the people did not have central air and heat. So many had to have their windows open. So day and night, they were absorbing all that stuff inside their homes. So I give credit to the people of the neighborhood whose names may have been forgotten, but their legacy is there, because if it was not for them supporting what was going on, I don't think we would have had the success that we had. And what really happened was that we heard about their problems, so we went in there not with our agenda, but we heard them and said, what do you all want done? And we followed their lead. We didn't go in there telling them what to do or what needed to be done. We asked them what did they want us to help them with. And that's how we created that trust, that unity, and people that you would not think. I know my family, many of the people that were in my family, I would never have thought of them coming out and standing in a picket line or yelling, close the tank farm, but they were on the picket lines. And because they understood what the cause was, and it was a just cause.
I want to say a little something about the tank farm and those residents, like Gilbert said, all the residents that stood up to fight the injustice of the tank farm. And I think that was really important, because we were holding those companies and the state agencies accountable to those injustices that they had permitted against our community. And that accountability got to the point where the tank farm Citizens Monitoring Committee was telling the agencies to report to us what was going on, what monitoring they were doing in terms of the testing or the air, of the water, of the soil. And so they were reporting to us. The health department, the state health department was also, told they needed to be at the tank farm meeting to report to us and the community what was going on. So, so those meetings were held in the community in times that the community could attend. So, some of the state agency representatives would say, well, it's at night, it's after hours. Well, we have to live with this, and you have to, come to our community. And we even had the city council meeting in the Cali Guerrero. That was the first time that the city council had met outside of City Hall. And then the state agencies were so used to having their meetings during the day when people could not attend. They were not accessible. Even if you could go during the day and had to ride the bus, you could not even get to it without having to walk a mile or more to the location of those state agencies. So there was a lot going on, but we were able to force those agencies to come to our community and really realize what was going on. The tank farm was the initial step that was taken because they could see it, and they knew what we were going through. And so, but that was sort of what kicked it off. But we continued that pressure and that accountability through those meetings. And we forced them to do that testing, and we continued to report to them, hey, what kind of testing are you doing? And we had to really research, like, okay, there's different types of monitoring that can be done on the air. What kind of monitoring are you doing? What kind of test are you doing on the water? And so it was real important that we got all that information as soon as we did, but it was the pressure of the community that moved it along and got it to the point where they had to close the facility.
Yeah, and I want to go back real quick to the toxic tour, because the toxic tour was something that played a major role, like others have said, because somebody's phone needs to turn off your phone. What we have to remember was the environmental justice movement, the environmental movement against environmental racism was at its peak at this particular time. So communities of color throughout the United States were really, advocating for all the changes, and also recognizing that they were the fence line communities. They were the communities that were living up close to all the toxic and hazardous facilities. But I do want to recognize that when that toxic tour, it was Senator Gonzalo Barrientos that went to the Texas Water Commission that says, hey, we want the water testing. Because for us to request it, which we did, was almost falling on deaf ears. But when the senator said it, it began to go. It was State Representative Glenn Maxey who told the Texas Air Control Board, hey, you need to get out there and do the air testing. And then I want to say that it was Dr. Neil Carmen with the Sierra Club who then analyzed all the data. Because there's one thing getting the data on air toxic, there's another thing for grassroots communities to be able to read all that data and interpret what that data really means. And so it was Dr. Neil Carmen who took the time to review that data and then break it down to the community. And that's when we found out that the community was being exposed to benzene 720 times over the allowable rate. They were basically, killing the community with all those the toxic emissions. And then I also want to thank, because after that, it was the county commissioner's court, like Gilbert said, it was Judge Bill Alshire and Marcos de Leon who put it on the table to appropriate $250,000 to do a civil and criminal investigation. We couldn't have moved forward without that investigation, because that money did what is paid for scientists and biologists to get out there and do the testing that was needed to begin to put the pressure the oil companies to relocate. And it was a community that selected Ron Davis and myself to go out with the biologists and the scientists in doing the testing in the area. And so it involved so many people. And I don't want people to forget that even though we were challenging Mobil Oil's permit, and they were acting like Mobil Oil permit, Mobil was the only corporation that was going to be spewing over benzene and toluene. But in actuality, there were total of 6 transnational billion-dollar corporations. And so what the state was spelling, it wasn't looking at cumulative impacts on the community. It was taking each permit as if they were the only company out there. And it was Chevron, Mobil, Exxon, Texaco, Citco, and Gulf Coastal states that were there. And that was a 52-acre area where these tanks were at, and that were exposing people to all this contaminating toxics that were going into the air and into the groundwater. And so it was a very big fight. And it was, I do want to add though, that we did get a 2000 grant from Lois Gibbs Citizens House on Hazardous Waste. And at all the meetings, we would take up nickels, dimes, and quarters. Nobody was paid. And what we were doing was collecting that little money we had, and what we did get was using it to the max to print out the papers. You know, you had to pay when you go to research to get copies, all of this stuff. And it was used to really, like Sylvia said, to educate the community and put it together. And it was, you know, Sylvia Herrera who helped put together that one-page survey, but who did the major research, and something that we've continued to use in the Holly area and some other places. But this was a real big fight because you're talking about grassroots people who took on billion-dollar corporations, you know, and so it was a very big struggle. And it was community. I don't separate myself because we're all communities here, Sylvia, Gilbert, and everybody. It's not like we were all, and our motto was we speak for ourselves. Because when the environmentalists, mainstream environmentalists did get in, we said, no, we want you to help us. We want you to do the emails, you know, get the government and all this stuff, but don't speak for us. People of color have got to speak for themselves, and we've got to continue that whole leadership role for the community.
A little bit more on the water issue. When the testing of the water began, one of the things that, and I think my aunt Padilla mentioned, that all of the water tanks had retention ponds, and they were berms around them, which were maybe 8-10 feet high. So they would accumulate a lot of the water that were used in the process of the work at the tank farm. But when it rained, and even if not, some of those berms would overflow with contaminated water. And that contaminated water flowed into the backyards of the neighbors on Alf Street. And not only that, it what they call leached into, and with the contaminants into other areas of the neighborhood, headed toward Go Valley Park and so forth. There were a lot of still active water wells in the area that people used to water the gardens, to do whatever they needed to do. They still use the old water wells that have been there back in the day. I mean, we're talking about 40s, 30s, and so forth. And they found that a number of those water wells that they were using, and some of them were actually using some of that water to drink, was also contaminated. And this was outside of the 52-acre tank farm. So one of the things that was required in the final analysis was that I think the tank farms had to pay for cleaning up all of that contamination. They had to go and remove, I don't remember how many feet, maybe Susana or Sylvia remembers, of contaminated dirt from people's yards, from surrounding areas, and even close to the Go Valley Park, which is maybe a quarter mile away or more. And so this was not just in the neighborhood Alf and Munson and Proc Lane, but it expanded in concentric circles out. And as the more they investigated, the more they tested, the more damage they found in larger areas of the neighborhood. And so the companies had to clean up some of the areas back to the level where they could build housing. Some of it has been cleaned up to a point that it's not clean to the level of being able to build houses in them, but they can build industrial parks, and they've built a couple of them already on there, and we're getting ready to build a real big one. But this became much larger than 2 or 3 little streets. It was a whole big area that when they started looking at the water, they found that the water that people were drinking, bathing with, gardening with, was also contaminated.
You all mentioned a variety of techniques for community organizing that you guys use, from like protesting to the community meetings to the lawsuit. What advice would you give people who might be facing similar issues and want to get involved in community organizing?
Listen to the people, because you are not, I don't think any of us here really would consider ourselves community leaders. Other people consider us that. We're community organizers, and there's a big difference. As an organizer, you love and care for your neighborhood, for your neighbors, for your people. And whether it's issues which we had with the Brown Berets around police brutality, or our brothers and sisters getting killed in unjust wars in Vietnam or the Middle East today, people are hurting, and people are wanting to talk. And sometimes what you do when you speak, you again, like I said earlier, you listen and you can hear what they want. They may not know how to do it, and your job is to sort of be a guide and a supporter, but you let them speak. If you notice, and there's other videos that are even longer than this, you see a lot of the community people speaking. They're the ones that need to tell their story. You're there because you may know them a little bit more technically, things that you may have, and at that time, we may have had access to printing fax machines or things like that they did not have. So we provided that. But at the same time, as an organizer, you're also looking for your future leaders, because in those communities, Ms. Rivera that was there, and others that, and I have to say, very proudly so, that they were 99.9% women. They were the mothers, the sisters, the aunts, the grandmothers of the children that were being affected. They were the leaders. They took up the cause. And so what you do, you look and see who are the leaders in the community, and you help refine their abilities and help them learn how to do the Xeroxing, do the door knocking, do the surveys, do all of the things that they need to do in order to be the leaders. And the rest of the community will support them because they know them. They grew up with them. They're the mothers that talk every afternoon when the kids come home from school and compare notes about why is my kid sick? And then they say, well, my kid is sick, has the same issues. So there's that communication and that contact, and that's where you build that organization, that neighborhood association that Susana was talking about, or whatever they want to do, and you're there as an assistant. You're there to help. You're not there to really lead. You're there to help them. And that's what I see. My job as an organizer is to help people learn how to be leaders, but not lead them.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that too, because we have been very fortunate, including I'd like to recognize Alexia because she's been so helpful, as many other students that have come to Poder, and I see Raul and others that have gone through the Young Scholars for Justice. But I want to say that that we ask, how can we help? And that's very important, whether it's allies or students or people outside of the community, rather than coming to the community and saying, hey, I want to help and this is how I want to help, or I want to do a research topic on this, and it might not even be something that the people in the community need help with, and or concerned about. And so to ask, how can I help, is a way to respect the community and recognize the expertise of the community is there already. You don't have the expertise of the community necessarily when you're coming into the community. So that's very important initial step to make sure that you respect the neighborhood and the people that live there, and slowly you can gain their trust, and then you're able to help in a lot of ways that community in whatever they've asked you to help with. But I think that's very important to recognize that the communities a lot are already organized, but maybe informally and not recognized by, say, the outside people. But we have a network already established, and to a degree, a lot of times there's other areas that we are complete experts on, but need help on maybe like the accessing the computers or other information. Where do you get to? I mean, we had to even do a form or a sheet where we were telling people how to complain, because it was so basic that people would call and complain, but they say, oh, they call a number, and they say, well, this is not the number, let me give you another number, or they would not take down the information that they needed, like what time, where was it, who they spoke to, just very basic information. But it was very important to document what we were doing with incidences or situations at the tank farm. So it's really just exchanging information between the community and the organizer or the people that are trying to assist and help, but never to go in and say, oh, I can talk about this issue for you. It's not for them. It's to assist the community.
And I'll just add that I think a key thing is relationship building. It's very important to do relationship building. I've always looked at the community not in a smaller sense, but I grew up looking at community as arrasa. All our people were one community, right? Because I grew up from a big family and they live in all the different directions. So to me, it's not, I have brothers that live in the tank farm area, in the Holly area, in Montapis. where you see there's been hazardous, I've got family members there. And so to me, my sense of community has been always broader. It's been all the raza, all the Latino and people of color. I look at it at a broader sense. And so how do we continue to build those relationships in those communities? And when it helps when you have family members there, because people in that immediate area know that particular family members. But I always say, all it takes is two people. One that recognizes there's an issue or there's a concern or there's, a problem, and finding someone else who also sees the same thing you do to take off with it, to then do the research, to then bring that information. Because like they said, the people were living there and they knew something was wrong, but they didn't quite know. They didn't make the connection between the exposure and the health problems that they had, right? And so it's how do you make those connections? And it takes somebody too that recognizes this and then finding someone else and then beginning. Because what we did was we created those phone captains. So the people who came to the meetings, sort of like dividing the neighborhood where you live, can you call these 10 people for the meeting? Can you call these 10 people when we're going to go testify? And then it was forming neighborhood associations because the city of Austin is neighborhood driven. That's how you got your notices. That's how you get who's going to change your zoning or who's building what. And so it was like where there were no neighborhood associations, it's like, let's help them form a neighborhood association so that they'll have their own chairs or spokesperson, and they make decisions within those particular issues. And I think that's what Poder builds is on a lot of the indigenous culture, is that we looked at what we would have villages, we had neighborhood associations. And you'll see that 7 neighborhood association leaders sit on our board of directors, right? Because we got institutionalized, but still following the indigenous concept that all those neighborhoods have chairs or their village chief, if you want to go back to the indigenous, their village spokesperson, like Gilbert Rivera, and then bringing them to the table, because the Citizens Monitoring Review Committee had 15 representatives on there. It wasn't 2 or 3, it was 15 representatives who sat on that Citizens Tank Farm Monitoring Committee that Dr. Herrera talked about, and asking the questions to all the different agencies. It takes a lot of organizing to coordinate that, but once you reach to the people, and like I said, it's then doing the education. How do you read the notices? How do you know about this chemical? Because I was so pleased when I heard people talking about xylene and toluene, and you see Miss Anita Padilla talking about it. I mean, all of a sudden they all become very knowledgeable about these chemicals, but someone has to provide that education and sort of like Gilbert said, that assistance, that helping people out, whether it's through technology or research, but sharing that information. And vice versa, the community became the biological monitors because they knew what was happening to them. Kids are having nosebleed rashes or no parents. They are, like Sylvia said, the experts on what's happening to their bodies in their community, and then connecting that to serve the health people, the scientific people on the impacts. But I always tell people, it just takes two people to start. And then it just grows from there. And, we all have to take that role in speaking out against injustice, whatever that injustice may be. And we have to work together and help each other and not let the city of Austin divide us like they did in neighborhood plans by saying, well, you're in Rosewood, you can't talk about what's in Montopolis, or you're in Montopolis, you can't talk about what's in Gold Valley, Johnston, because they don't have the indigenous concept that we have, that we're all one family. And then them by doing boundaries doesn't say we can't cross that boundary. And I think that's how we have to really continue, is don't let them set the boundaries as to who we can communicate with, who we can have relationships with. And then real quickly, I just wanted to, how important it is to have the young people involved. Like Sylvia said, I'm really glad that, we have Raul, Erica Gonzalez, and Nancy Flores, and other people are on this, because those are students that have come from the university who have dedicated and helped and movement building. And even if they're not from this barrio, they understand it and they know the injustices that have happened, and they want to be assisting and helping in every way they can and making changes, because whatever we do here is going to benefit people in other cities or state and vice versa.
Thank you.
want to
Go for it.
say a little more on the relationship building, because another part was we did the internal part in terms of our community and providing that information and organizing. But at the same time, we were building relationships of the different agencies or different other allies that were out there. And that was real important because we were doing our homework. And so really we earned the respect of even people that were working, say, with BFI. When we took on BFI, we were respected by city council. We were respected or recognized by the different representatives in the health community with the state and the city or county, because we were doing our homework and we were just stating facts that both, everybody knew that the tank farm was not it was in a neighborhood that was affecting our health. And so I think that Poder, through the organizing, we were also establishing that relationship where people had to listen and they had to respond because we were bringing the facts to them that they could not deny. But that was real important. And they actually, were able to, in the end, admit that, yes, that what we were saying was important, and it was true that it had affected people in the community.
Yeah, and just real quickly, because I don't want to forget that the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice and the Texas Network for Environmental and Economic Justice, those were networks that were supporting our efforts and who were sending emails and letters to the city, also to the Exxon Corporation. And so there was support outside of our city. That's why I said, the relationships and families and community is bigger. And it was really helpful to have our allies, people throughout the whole region and people throughout the state who are also supporting the local grassroots effort happening in East Austin.
I want to ask one final question, and I also want to encourage anyone in the audience, if you do have a question, to put it in the chat and we can ask that in the last 10 minutes. But my final question for you guys is, what do you think the legacy of Tank Farm is? Thinking about both, the environmental racism and the negative impacts, but also the organizing and the victory.
Well, in my family, I think it's a legacy of pain, given the horrible death that my mom went and pain that she went through with the effects of all those toxins go in her body. But it's also that's one part of it, but it's also a legacy of mobilizing, because I'm the oldest in my family, and a lot of times my cousins and other people would say, Gilbert, you're crazy. You're fighting the police. They beat you up and you're still fighting them. You're being put in jail. You're picketing and doing all these things. And today, I see some of them heading neighborhood associations, feeding the poor and the homeless, doing a lot of the things that I was criticized for. And so I sit back and proudly say, maybe they listened once and they're doing what they can. But I think the legacy of the tank farm is that it woke the community up. All of East Austin, all of Austin woke it up to the fact that we cannot, as a city, as a people, allow the city of Austin to harm us as much as they were doing back in those days when they were zoning all of East Austin industrial. And I think one of the biggest things that is on our plates right now is protecting our neighborhoods. We are one big family. We are all related. We respect all our relations. And when one of us hurts, we all hurt. We are all being attacked by gentrification. And this has been part of what the cities of Austin's legacy is since 1928, when they segregated us into East Austin. Almost 100 years later, we're still being attacked through segregation, gentrification, and we're being pushed further east. We were pushed east in 1928, east of what is now Interstate 35, and now we're being pushed east of what is now the airport and so forth. And we need to mobilize and organize and join ourselves, across cultural and racial lines, and say this is the newest front. There are many fronts, but this is one of the worst ones that is going on right now. Because I used to tell people that whenever I moved into East, traveled from my job in West Austin into East Austin, I felt like I was home because I knew most everybody. I knew everybody up and down the street. If I was in trouble, and a couple of times riding beat up Ramflas in East Austin and your car would break down, somebody would drive by and say, "Hey, Gilbert, can I help you?" Because they knew you. So that's that family that Susana's talking about. And we need to keep that family strong, and we need to unite and keep what we can, because the fabric of East Austin is being torn thread by thread, and we need to start putting that fabric back together.
Go ahead, Sylvia.
I think that part of the legacy of the tank farm was that it was the spark, that it was a continuation of a spark, because we had been doing social justice issues for all our life, and addressing them, the injustices, the discrimination, the racism, all our life. But at that point in time, we were able to stand up and to the multinationals that were in our community. And then the tank farm initiated that movement to address the other injustices like BFI that was across the street from the tank farm. And we were able to deal with that issue in favor of the community. Then the Holly Power Plant was the other issue. And there's been issue after issue that we've addressed. And like Gilbert said, the unfortunate thing is that we were able to do all that, and yet there's still a continuation of that racism that's happening in East Austin, but it's a different form, and it takes on a different body, but it's still the same attack on our community. And but I think that has given strength to our younger generation and our families that are still there, and to recognize that it continues in our community, and they have to stand strong and to continue to maintain and live in East Austin just like we have for generations. And so I think that as long as the younger people that are there continue, the struggle will continue to be addressed in a way that we can have that environment, the surroundings that for generations we've been protecting and trying to protect, including the springs, the Oak Springs. We have our own springs in East Austin, and those are the springs that come off the different areas in East Austin, including Oak Springs. West Austin forever, says Barton Springs, but we have our own springs as well. And we need to pay attention and consider the environmental beauty of East Austin, because it's a beautiful place that we have protected or tried to protect for generations. Thank you.
And I want to add that part of the Tank Farm legacy is a legacy of the continued racism, because it is the whole issue of the land use and zoning, and how the legacy that will persist is how Austin, relocated all people of color east of 35, but not only relocated the people, but relocated all the unwanted industry in communities of color, and how they neglected the communities of color and tried to treat us like we were not human beings. And I think that that's a legacy that's going to continue, a legacy of Austin's racist policies, of how it's done zoning. And even today we're fighting those zoning, and it might not be industrial and polluting facilities. We're now fighting high density development, high market rate housing. And so that land use and that zoning even continues today. I think that that's part of the legacy, but I think the other part of the legacy is the poder of the people, the empowerment of the people, the empowerment of the grassroots people to organize and take on billion-dollar corporations and kick their ass out of East Austin. That was the biggest victory ever. I mean, how many people from the very, grassroots working people, working poor people, take on transnational corporations and then kick them out of the neighborhood. And then within such a short period of time, that is a legacy that we show the empowerment when people unite, and when they unite with their allies, and they unite with their allies, state, regional wise, and national wise, how we can make changes, within the communities. And to me, that's a legacy that can't be forgotten. It can't be forgotten. We can't forget the legacy that has happened to the people. And I saw real quickly a question by, I'm going to jump ahead of you, Alexia, but I saw a question by Marta Cotera about, well, what would we like the city to do, because of the tank farm? Well, there's 44 acres in East Austin. There's about, we did an analysis in that Gold Valley Johnston area. There's about 20 acres behind where Southwest Key Building is. And we think that the city should transfer that land to low income and public housing, because a lot of the people there at the tank farm area have been displaced, they've been gentrified. The gentrifiers are benefiting from the grassroots community cleaning up the area. And so I think that for reparations, that low income and public housing that the city hasn't built since the 30s, that needs to be happening right in that whole tank farm area and the Gold Valley Johnston area. I think that that's something that the city needs to do. It also can put up a plaque there recognizing the work of the grassroots people, so that people don't forget, because we now know that area has been gentrified and new building is coming in. They're now planning the developments, all of these things that have been coming in. And I don't think that the people should recognize the history of the grassroots struggle to clean up that area and to clean up East Austin.
And we have just 2 more questions in the chat, if you guys can answer them really quickly, since we have limited time. The first one is, did you also develop passive communication with the oil industry representative, or was it just at arm's length via lawsuit?
No, we actually had meetings with the oil companies. I remember, Sylvia, I don't know if it was Chevron or just Mobil at Johnston High School, which is now Eastside Memorial, where they came and they brought their epidemiologists and stuff. But it was pretty disgraceful meeting because basically at those meetings, they were trying to tell us that the fence was holding in the contamination, that above, the fencing was, contamination couldn't go past that fence. They also were saying that we were sick because we ate chili, drank, smoked, and all these, it was basically the things that we were consuming that were making people sick. And so it was pretty insulting how the tank farm people acted. And real quickly, I just want to say that the tank farm people then began to buy ads in the local grassroots newspaper and radio time, like La Prensa and Nakoa and Villagers, sort of like to attack what we were saying at that particular time. But luckily, we had a lot of allies within that media who would then give us free time to respond to the things that the tank farm owners were doing. But they were not, they were very hostile to the community.
And then one last final question in the chat. When a racist statement was made, what would you say or how would you respond?
Well, racist statements come in actions also, with zoning, with ordinances, with policies that affect us negatively. And very simply said, you respond accordingly. You respond with the abilities that you have. Some people may be more able to verbalize it. Some other may be more able to show it by boots on the ground. Others may be able to do it by writing, but you cannot allow it to go by. It has to be confronted. It has to be challenged, because if you don't, you are acquisition to those racist remarks, whether they're in actions or verbal.
Thank you. And that was our final question. And I also wanted to mention that in the chat, people have been talking about gentrification and speaking at City Council. So I just wanted to point that out, that if you would like to speak at City Council, you can go to their website to sign up. There's an upcoming Springsdale Green PUD project, which is further gentrifying East Austin, specifically the tank farm area. And then also you can continue to follow Poder and Susana on Facebook. We always post updates on what is currently happening, ways you can get involved, and ways you can help. And that is all. Thank you so much.
Wait, one more thing. I do want to announce that we'll be doing a whole year of series of all the different issues, some of the big victories that we had. So the next one is June the 24th. So if people want to pencil in on their calendar, and that will be the BFI. That will be the BFI video and the BFI panel. And it's going to be on June the 24th. So since this is our 30th year anniversary, we're going to have something happening each month to remind the people of the struggle that the people have undertaken, and that, that the Poder has helped organize, be a part of. And so that'll be coming up in June.
Yes, and you can also always go to poderaustin.com for for more information, and then also to donate. And I really want to thank our panelists today for all your wisdom and for being here with us, and then everyone that was able to come and to support Poder. And also, that is a very cute cat.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining.
Sí se puede.
Sí se puede.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.